All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Ray, and I'm going to call to order the March 12th, 2023 City Council Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. With me this evening is Councilmember Barbara DiMichele. Councilmember Zach Hall has an excused absence this evening. There will be two multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make public comment after the presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda item. So our first agenda item is public comment, and members of the public may address the council at this time in person or virtually. City Clerk, is there anybody online who has expressed an interest in making public comment?
Chair Ray, we currently have no online attendees.
Okay, and it doesn't look like anybody in the audience is interested in making public comment. Right, so we will skip over that, but just to note, there is another public comment opportunity later on the agenda. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes. Any objection to approving the draft minutes from our last meeting?
No.
Okay, without objection, the minutes have been approved. Okay, we have one agenda item, and it's a big one. It's ID 1339, the Transportation Concurrency Model. Transportation Manager John Mortensen is going to be presenting tonight, and I think he's brought some backup. So, John, welcome, and take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Chair Ray. I'm John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager with the city, and with me is Torsten Linau. He is our consultant with Jacobs, who's been working on our transportation concurrency system since 1998. And Torsten, can you go ahead and share the presentation?
I'm learning web. I've never used this program before, so I'm trying to figure it out. But I think I'm sharing it now. Oh wait, hold on. There we go. Is that good?
Yep, that's great. All right, let's go to next slide. Okay, so the purpose of this item is to talk about the 2022 update to the transportation concurrency model. And the agenda for tonight is to go over the purpose, the direction needed from the committee, give some background of the city's transportation concurrency system, talk about the results from the model update, the administration's recommendation, followed by timing and next steps. Next slide.
Oops, sorry, wrong way.
All right. So the purpose of this item tonight is Issaquah Municipal Code 18.15.245 requires updates to the city's transportation concurrency system. There's 3 triggers for when the concurrency system gets updated. It's when development's taken up, has reserved more than half of the trips that the city has available for development. Also, another time period when we would update it is if, when we're doing the comprehensive plan, if the city were to be reevaluating concurrency as part of that, that it would require an update. And then the last one is we're just supposed to do it every 3 years. Now, the last update was done in 2017, and doing some math, that would have put us right at 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So we chose to put the project on hold for a couple years to wait for travel patterns to go back to something that did not look like 2020. And another purpose for updating the transportation concurrency system is to make sure that development and transportation improvements are in sync. One of the purposes of transportation concurrency is to make sure that transportation improvements happen concurrent with development, and this is a way of checking to make sure we're still heading in the right direction or if we need to make corrections. And then finally, the information used from the transportation concurrency system update will eventually be used to update the city's traffic impact fees, and usually at the same time we update the bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees. Next slide. The direction that the administration needs from the committee tonight regarding the transportation concurrency is, first of all, we're going to provide an update on the model update and ask the question, does the committee support waiting until after the concurrency policy and level of service evaluation has been completed before deciding the future of 2 intersections that will operate below the city's adopted level of service in the year 2050? And next slide. And at this point, I'm going to transfer over to Torsten, who will give the update on the results and the background.
Great. Thank you, John. So as I go through this, if I say something that you don't understand, if I'm being too technical, please, by all means, just interrupt me and ask me. All right. So concurrency, I think most of you know, transportation concurrency is a requirement of state law. But the good thing is that the state basically gives each individual agency sort of the right to create its own concurrency system in the way that it sees fit and manage it however you see fit. So, so there's lots of flexibility, and that's why you see different concurrency systems from one agency to the next. So in 1998, the city did adopt their first transportation concurrency system. And I at that time was working for the city, working on an EIS for a development called East Village at the time. It's now called Talus. I think most of you know it as Talus. But Talus was the first development to go through the concurrency system, the new adopted concurrency system at that time. And it just so happened that the city's traffic engineer quit right around that same time. And so, so it was my pleasure, and it turned out that's how I got sort of involved in Issaquah's concurrency system way back in 1998. I basically had to learn the system on the fly and then use it to assess Talus, and it's sort of been history since then. So I do know a lot about the system, about concurrency, since I have worked on it since 1998, since its inception. And so just in general, this concurrency in Issaquah, the methodology that's used to assess your transportation system, that's been changed twice since 1998. And I'll go through a flow chart soon and explain those changes. And then since 1998, there have been 7 technical updates, which means the methodology didn't change, but we did update it to, new counts or new information that's, generally provided, land use or transportation improvements that have been changed over the years. The current methodology that's used in Issaquah, it's referred to as simplified concurrency. That was adopted back in 2010. And since 2010, it became effective in 2012. And since 2012, there's been only really the 2017 update, and then the update that I'm going to talk about tonight. There we go. Okay, so this timeline basically shows the history of concurrency, of transportation concurrency in Issaquah since 1998. As I mentioned, it was first adopted then, Ordinance 2184. Soon after Talus went through was the first development to actually use the new concurrency system in 1999. And when that happened, the system started to fail right away, and the city went into a state of moratorium, and so no new development was permitted after the Talus development was approved. There was another update that was done in 2000, and that was mostly just a technical update, and after that update, the city was still in a state of moratorium. Again, no development could move forward in Issaquah. Then in 2005, the city of Issaquah participated in a study called the BRIC study, and that stands for Bellevue, Redmond, Issaquah, and Kirkland. The 4 agencies got together and decided to do a study that looked at concurrency in general, but looking at a way to incorporate a multimodal approach to concurrency. And really, those 4 agencies, including you, Issaquah, you were really the first in the state to look at multimodal concurrency and to actually use it. And so that was a great undertaking, and I mean, obviously, you guys should be proud of that. Today, the only other change to concurrency in the state of Washington that is required, and this is a recent change, is that the state has required that every single agency have a multimodal concurrency system. So think about it, back in 2005, you were one of the first to embark on that already. In any event, in 2004, there was another update done to the concurrency system, and with that update, the moratorium was lifted and development was allowed to continue. The system up until 2004 was a link-based system, meaning that we measured capacity between intersections. So basically the links of the available capacity between intersections. And in reality, the majority of delay and or backup that you experience when you're driving the system isn't actually between the intersections, it's at the intersection itself. And so in 2006, there was an effort made to look at changing the methodology in Issaquah from a link-based system to an intersection-based system. And that was actually enacted in 2007. There was a major update done then to the concurrency system, and that was the first time that the system, the policy or the methodology was changed from link-based to intersection-based. It was still on the developers, it was the developers' onus, though, to run the concurrency model, and when they were proposing something in the city, and then to propose mitigation that would fix anything or any impacts that the developer created as a result of the development itself. And so over the years, we found that the city was basically getting improvements recommended by developers that were really, they were always intersection based, but they were very small improvements, like a turn lane or an adjustment to signal timing, etc. And in the end, the city was not getting the transportation improvements that it had envisioned for the city. And it was getting much smaller improvements just scattered throughout the city. And as a result, in 2010 and 2012, the Central Issaquah Plan was underway. And at that time, we decided to do another policy update or a methodology update, which resulted in simplified concurrency. The system still was intersection-based, but the onus now fell on the city to determine the level of service within the city and the set of transportation improvements that would be required to maintain that level of service. And what then happened was, as a developer came in the door, they were approved based on their land use. And if their land use was consistent with the land use that we'd assumed in the transportation concurrency model, then they were approved. But they paid an impact fee, which helps build the transportation system that the city had set forth in the comprehensive plan. So since 2012, that's been the new concurrency system. You might ask about the multimodal piece. I think John had alluded to that. With each concurrency update, we then do an update to the impact fee system. And there's also a multimodal, a voluntary multimodal fee that's required that helps build the non-motorized facilities within the city, and that's the multimodal piece of this concurrency system. So as I mentioned, 2017 was the last technical update that was done, and then of course the world was hit by the pandemic, and that changed travel patterns dramatically. Instead of updating the system more regularly, like in 2020 or 2021, we decided to hold off until travel patterns seemed to settle down and get back to normal. So that's why we had initiated the update in 2022. Any questions before I move on? Okay.
Hold on just a second. I know I have a question. I was going to give Barb first shot. I'm
Great.
just curious. I mean, do we have a sense that we are back to pre-pandemic traffic patterns and traffic volumes?
So definitely not. There's been, there's really no agency that I've worked with that is back to pre-pandemic traffic levels. They certainly have increased those since the worst of the pandemic. And so there is an upward trend. I do believe they've been settling down. But I don't know that we've seen the end of, traffic patterns changing. I think it's just it was a major shift and a major change in travel patterns. And for now, I think it's settled down. I can't guarantee that it's not going to, continue to change and morph over time. But I do believe the 2022 traffic counts that we obtained are probably very consistent with sort of a settled down, travel pattern.
So let me play that back at you. So we are down from pre-pandemic levels, but we think we've hit a plateau of what, at least in the short term, will be our expected number of trips, number of cars, traffic pattern.
Perfect way of saying it. And your use of the word short term is important because, as John mentioned and as I indicated, we do these updates typically every 3 years. And so if travel patterns do change, the city sort of self-monitors themselves to make sure that, we don't get too far out of sync. So if we continue to allow development to occur between this update and your next update, let's say in 2025, then, hopefully we will have caught any changes in travel patterns in 2025 that didn't get you so far out of sync in terms of, balancing the amount of development that occurs, but also building the transportation system at the same time that can support that development.
Deputy Council President, you have questions?
He just answered the question I was going to ask. So.
Okay. All right, preemptive strike.
All right.
I like it.
Good. All right. Good. Well, then I'll continue. So when we do a technical update of your concurrency system, there's basically 3 things that we do. We have models that we use to replicate basically traffic patterns in the city. And what we do with those models is we obtain new traffic counts, and then we calibrate those models to the traffic counts so that we can be assured that the models are replicating the real world as best as possible. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is we get the new counts and we start to calibrate those models. The next major thing that we do is we work with city staff to update all the land uses in the city. And that includes what was approved in for development in, let's say, the last update in 2017. We go through that list of developments, and we confirm with city staff, okay, did development X get built? Or if it is partially built, how much of it got built and how much of it is still unbuilt? And so we go through those land use, reviews with city staff, and we update the model to reflect all of those land use changes that have occurred since 2017. And then lastly, we go through and do updates to the transportation network. So just like land use, we look at what was built in the transportation system since 2017, And then, are there any new projects that were added to the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, since the 2017 update that we should be including in the model moving forward?
I have just a quick question about the modeling, and I get, we can look at our development here, but because we're such a nexus of transportation from outside of the city, how do we factor in even the pass-through traffic, but also the destination traffic where people are coming to Costco or whatever from outside the city? How is that factored into the modeling?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, the model that we use for the city is city specific, but the model is bigger than the city. So we do include a good half of the city of Sammamish. There are portions of King County and portions of Bellevue within our model window. Then beyond the Issaquah model window, we use the regional model, the PSRC model, to obtain the 2050 traffic volumes that are entering and leaving the city at your model window, and from the PSRC model. So that takes into account all the growth that's been assumed outside of the city, and we kind of force the Issaquah model to use those numbers coming in and out of the city's model, so that we know exactly how many folks are coming in and out based on the regional PSRC model.
Deputy, oh, no, I was just going to pass it over to you.
So this is a concurrency 101 question, but so how exactly do you tabulate numbers? Are those the little strips that go across the road and count cars coming in and out, or do we actually send people out? I was really amazed that we have figures for lots and lots and lots of intersections. So I'm going to presume that we don't send people out to every intersection, but just exactly how do we get those numbers?
I mean, actually, back in 1998, we did. You might have, if you were around in 1998, people sat in lawn chairs at intersections with a board on their lap, and they clicked and counted cars. We don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. It's all done with video at this point. It's very technical, but so you don't see people doing it anymore. Humans out at intersections, but we do set up cameras, and then the cameras are used to count the cars. And so that's how it's done.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think we're good.
All right. Okay, so the transportation concurrency system is made up of two separate models. And this is where I might get a little technical, so by all means, please interrupt me if you don't understand. So the first model is what we call a travel demand model. That model is used to predict traffic. Where do people go based on the land uses that we input into that model? So, for instance, a typical trip in the morning might be from home to work, and in the evening it would be from work to home. Of course, there might be intermediate trips. If you have children and you're going to a daycare, it might be from work to a daycare to home. Those are all trips that we characterize using this first model, the travel demand model, based on the land uses that we use or that we input into the model. So that first model, we do use traffic counts to calibrate the model. There is a network that's used, and we define the capacity of each roadway within the city in that model. But the unique piece of this model is that it also contains land use. And so the attractions of trips from one land use to another, that's what's used to predict travel patterns within the city. And of course, we calibrate it to the counts. The output of that first model are traffic volumes or traffic forecasts on roadways and at intersections. We then take that output and it goes into the second model, which is a traffic operations model. And that model is used to determine the level of service at intersections. So how much delay are you experiencing at an intersection is what's used to determine the level of service of an intersection. And I'll go into the definitions of level of service a little bit later. in this presentation, but basically it's like a report card. If you've seen it before, A, B, C, D, E, and F are the levels, A being good, F being bad. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail later, but it's that second model that's ultimately used to determine the capacities or the available capacity left on your transportation system and the levels of service. Any questions before I move on?
I do, and it's maybe not a question for this time, but I'm going to put it out there and you can answer it whenever you want, because it might be more appropriate. But one of the things that we're looking at investing in is the intelligent transportation system. And I would like, at some time before we get done tonight, to see how that might affect the modeling and also the actual level of service at intersections. And so if you factor that in someplace, so I'll let you do it now. You can do it later, just sometime.
No, it's fine. It's factored into that second model. So that second model is the one that is more refined and where we can use inputs that, that ITS or intelligent transportation systems would affect or impact. That's where it's taken care of in that second model.
So the model would evolve over time. So if, we're years, several years before we start implementing. So we might see a change in this the next time we do it because of the modeling, or will we see it, are we projecting for that far out where we want to kind of pre-position that data?
Yeah, I mean, these models evolve every year. There's a new release basically of these models, and they get more and more sophisticated as time goes on. So as there are more technologies out there, the models are updated so that you can input what technologies you're using that could be implemented into the model.
That makes great sense.
Yep.
Barb, do you have something?
All right, so I sent John a bunch of questions, so this one I'll ask out loud because it was interesting to me. So we're talking about how, the input goes into the model and then out comes the level of service. So I was looking at the intersection of Dogwood and Front Street, which is currently a level of service C, but it's predicted to be a B by 2050. So I've been stuck there. If I'm coming in from Dogwood, I've been stuck there for at least 5 minutes sometimes, especially if you're trying to do a left, but also sometimes if you're doing a right. And so my question was, you've got traffic coming in from basically 4 different directions into an intersection. And if one of those streets is slow, but the rest of it is fast, how do you get to that level of service that identifies all of the issues at a particular intersection?
You bet. So it's a little bit of a complicated answer. First of all, the level of service of an unsignalized intersection is measured differently than the level of service at a signalized intersection. So let's start with, I believe that intersection is unsignalized today. And so at an unsignalized intersection, the worst movement is the one that's actually reported as the level of service. So if it's usually a side street, because that's the one that stopped. And then at that intersection, there is a planned improvement. So when you said it went from C to B, that was because there's a signal proposed at that intersection and a turn lane improvement that was included in the future year model. And at a signalized intersection, you actually average the delays at every single movement at the intersection. And so the level of service that's reported is an overall average of all the movements, not the worst movement. But it is a weighted average. So to get to your point, that if there is a movement that is a lot of traffic, but it's moving fast or it's moving well, and then there's another movement that is experiencing a lot of delay, but it's a low volume movement. That low volume movement is going to have very little impact on the overall level of service at the intersection because there's so many vehicles at the intersection that are generally having low delay at the intersection. So that's how it's measured. So it's an overall average or weighted average of delay at the intersection if it's a signalized intersection. Now, we can and we do have the levels of service at each individual movement. So for instance, that intersection that you're talking about, even though it might be operating at B, we would be able to look up what is the level of service of, let's say, a side street left turn, and potentially that could be a level service E. But that averaged with all the rest results in the intersection overall operating at level service B. Now, did that answer your question?
That answered my question, and when I'm talking to residents of Issaquah who question how that level of service got assigned at that particular intersection, I'm going to carry a video of your explanation. So thank you very much. I know it's very complicated. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Oops, went the wrong way. Okay. So I mentioned earlier there were 3 major steps to doing an update. The first is that calibration step, so the traffic count. So I just want to give you a little bit more detail on that. We did collect 78 intersection counts throughout the city. They were obtained between April and June of 2022. Those were, we made sure that those were during the period that school was still in session, because school traffic does add to the overall levels of congestion in the city. And so we always ensure when we do these updates that they're during, the school session. So when I say intersection counts, what that means, again, as I had mentioned, is that we use cameras to count at the intersections. Usually 2 hours of data is collected during the PM peak hour. And then we take the absolute peak that's used to calibrate the models. So the 1 hour peak within that 2 hours of data that's collected. And we basically know every single movement, the count of cars at every single movement. So every single left, right, and through movement on each approach is counted. And that's what makes up an intersection turning movement count. In addition to those 78 intersection counts, we also obtained 8 daily counts. Now, I think someone referred to those tubes that are put across a roadway. That's how you generally collect daily counts. So they're there for more than 24 hours, and they count cars going over the tube, basically. And so we have, in addition to the intersection counts, we have daily counts that we use at the model window. Again, that's the outskirts of the model, and we always match those counts to the PSRC model, the regional Puget Sound Regional Council model, so that we can ensure that when we get the volumes from that model, we compare them to the actual counts that we obtained, make sure that they're in sync, and we calibrate to that. And that way we know that when we're forecasting out to the future and using the PSRC forecasts at your model window, that they are accurate. Any questions about the counts before I move on?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, the next major update we do is with the land use. And so I'm going to break this up into 2 slides. We do both commercial and residential updates of land use. And the graphic that I've got up on the slide shows basically the history since the simplified concurrency system was adopted back in 2012. So you've got the 2013 update, the 2017 update, and then of course tonight's update that we're presenting in 2022. So you see the history of how land use has changed over those years. The blue bars are existing, so that means what land use was built, in place, and generating traffic at the time that we did the updates. The orange bars represent land use that the city has approved, so developments that have been approved, but they haven't been built yet at the time that we did the update. We account for that traffic separately than we do for future land use, which is the gray bar. Those are land uses that the city desires and hopes will happen through the comprehensive plan, but that there hasn't been an identified development yet, or a developer has not come in the door yet. But those are land uses that the city is targeting and hoping to obtain or to achieve by the growth year. And I should mention our growth year is 2050. That corresponds to the PSRC regional model. And we typically, when we do these updates, we always match to whatever the latest regional PSRC regional model year is, so that we can use that model for, as I had mentioned before, the model window. So talking about commercial land uses, overall, by 2050, there's about 2 million square feet of commercial space that is anticipated over your existing commercial space today. 1.1 million square feet has been built since 2017. So you see that blue bar increased slightly since the 2017 update. That's about 1.1 million square feet that was built over those 5 years. Then 2.2 million square feet, there's 2.2 million square feet more in that orange bar since 2017. And the major reason for that is back in 2017, when we did the update then, the major developments, Talus and Highlands, both of those developments were sunsetting. So their development agreements were retiring, but they had still not completely built out. At that time, the city made a decision to move all of the development that had previously been approved for those two developments out of the pipeline and move it into future land use. So basically the city said, look, you guys can still build that land use, but it's no longer approved. You have to come back through the city system and get it approved if you want to build it. Now, over the years, since 2017 and up to this year, I think the logic on that has reversed. And so what we did with this year's update is all that land use that in Talus and Highlands that had not yet been built, we moved it out of the gray bar and put it back into the orange bar. So it's now considered pipeline development again. And so that's why you see such a large increase in that orange bar.
Hey, quick question about that.
Sure.
Does the modeling then treat the orange bar different than the gray bar?
It does, only in that the impact fees that are charged for development is based on the gray bar. Everything orange and blue is either existing, has already paid the impact fee through an approved development agreement, or obviously it was existing when the model was built, so it didn't ever pay an impact fee.
So this is really about anticipated revenues more than it is about the
Exactly.
model itself. Got it. Thanks.
Right. The land use was always there. It's just a matter of where is your impact? What is the basis for your impact fee? How much land use are we charging that impact fee on? So that's the big change. Okay, and so what's left in that gray bar is 1.3 million square feet less in the long range plan than was previously in the 2017 models. So that explains why the gray bar is smaller than in the 2017. But overall, there is planned growth of about 2.2 million square feet. So that's the number that impact fees would be based on. Okay. All right, let's talk about residential land uses now. So a little bit different. Where you saw on the previous slide, the commercial is actually higher in 2022 than it was in 2017. For residential land use, it actually is less than, and that's because there was a shift of land uses within the Central Issaquah plan that was felt was never actually going to happen or is possible to happen. And so that's where that gray bar changed from 2017 to 2022. Is that in working with city staff, we decided a more realistic number of residential units is the new gray bar, which is significantly less than what was estimated in 2017. So overall, that is that results in about 1,000 fewer units overall in 2050 than was assumed in the 2017 model. But breaking down the numbers, you'll see the blue bar did increase. So since 2017, there's been about 1,000 new residential units built. And since 2017, there's been about 200 more units that have been approved through developments that have come in the door. And so that is the resulting 4,000 units planned growth overall. Any questions about that?
Nope, I think it makes sense.
Okay, great. All right, this table is basically, I know it's a lot of numbers. It's basically a summary of what I just presented, except that it's broke. So if you were interested in where is that growth actually occurring within the city, it's broken out in this table. So that first set of numbers under the gray Central Issaquah sub-area, those are all sort of subsets of the Central Issaquah sub-area, and that is actually where most of the growth is planned. And then we broke out also the villages. So you see Highlands, Talus, and Lakeside. And so you can see how growth is projected over the years for both residential and commercial. If you were interested, you could see how that changes over time. And then lastly, that last gray bar is the rest of the city that excludes the Issaquah sub-area and the villages. And so you'll see there, actually, there's very little growth anticipated outside of the Central Issaquah area and the villages. Very little growth. Any questions about that?
This is maybe more of a comment than a question. I'm just really shocked, quite honestly, the commercial growth in the Highlands. I mean, that's just a big old number. So I don't know that I need an answer. I just would be really curious to know what we think, if what's in that pipeline of commercial and actually in residential growth too in the Highlands.
Yeah, and there was actually a shift of commercial to residential up in the Highlands with this update. A development known as Shelter, I think, had shifted some of its land use from commercial to residential. So there was actually an increase of residential, but still a significant amount of commercial. So yeah, up in the Highlands, you'll see there's 4.9 million square feet in the pipeline. So that's what's already been approved and is, going to happen based on approvals. But currently there's 2.5 million square feet that's already been built. So there is a significant amount still in the books to happen.
Deputy City Administrator, you're coming online.
Well, thank you, Councilmember. You may recall that the city has a development agreement with Swedish Hospital, which
Yeah.
accounts for some of that commercial, as well as I'm going to guess that the former, or maybe I shouldn't call it former, but the property that was supposed to be a new Bellevue College campus, its future fate is yet to be determined and is probably included in this count.
It is.
Okay. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting because the pipeline is twice the built base, and it's like, oh, I didn't know there was that much growth capacity left in the Highlands. So just interesting. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Okay, so we tackled the counts and calibration. We talked about land use. The third major thing that we do with an update is we look at the transportation improvements that are planned within the city. And of course, for that, we go to your adopted transportation improvement program. In this case, and at the time that we were doing this update, we used the 2023 to 2028 TIP. And we go through the long list of projects that are included in there, and we determine which projects are capacity related. So in other words, which projects would affect the transportation system in terms of capacity. And out of those, there were 25. They're all, I'm not going to go through every single one, but you can see on the graphic that, which the black lines are sort of corridor projects, and then the black dots are intersection-based improvements. And so, if you're interested, you can look at the labels that are used on here are the exact identifiers that are used in your TIP. So, if you look up T23, it's which is on Newport Way, it should show in your TIP the improvements that are planned on Newport Way, and I believe that includes probably 2 or 3 roundabouts and a widening in one direction along that corridor. So that's an example. In addition to the TIP, there are developer agreements that were signed by various developers around the city. And through those development agreements, they agreed to build transportation improvements as part of their approval. And back in 2017, there were about 7 of those improvements. The list is now down to 3. The other 4 were all built since 2017, so those don't show up on this map anymore, but the 3 remaining ones are still on here. And that's why when you look for them, they're called DM5, DM6, DM7. The reason why we start at 5 and 6 and 7 is because the first 1, 2, 3, and 4 were built. And so just to keep track of all of those improvements, we just continue the numbering system. So I didn't want you to think that DM 1, 2, 3, and 4 are missing from the graphic. They're accounted for. They've
right.
already been built.
Question from
Yeah,
council member,
just
deputy
something,
council president, whatever your title is this year.
whatever it is. And this just occurred to me as I'm looking at the map. So we're anticipating that we'll have a link light rail station in 2045. We're hoping, we've got our fingers crossed at any rate. Would the, if that were completed by 2045, prior to 2050, would that impact our concurrency at any, in any way?
It does.
Oh,
And it's been accounted for in this update
oh,
and in the past update by, since the model doesn't actually model link light rail, what we do is we account for the mode shift. So people, the hope obviously is that instead of using your car, you'll be using link light rail, right? And so the assumption in this model, which was determined way back in 2012, is that about a total of about 20% of the trips in the model would be done by other modes. That includes walking and biking and buses, but it also includes link light rail. So today, that roughly you're at about 10% mode split. And so what I would say is, so that would include the buses, the walking and biking, right? But there's no link light rail today. So to get to that 20%, we're basically assuming another 10% will be using link light rail. It's a conservative estimate for right now because we really don't know. The hope obviously would be that it's going to be more than 10%, but we didn't want to overestimate for the purposes of this model and ultimately get you in trouble if it isn't 10%. So that's the assumption that's built into the model, is that there's a reduction of overall traffic in the city by 10%, in addition to what you're already achieving through mode split.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. So as a result of those 3 updates that I just talked about, the traffic counts, the land uses, and the transportation improvements, this graphic shows basically an overall result of the number of trips that are included in the model or traffic during the PM peak hour. And again, this is a historical map. So you'll see existing numbers, but then also the future projections. So the 2022 bar would be this year's update, and that includes today's counts that we collected in the field. And then if you go all the way to the end of the graphic, the 2050 number is this year's concurrency update and projections for 2050. You'll see both of those bars are lower than the previous years, the 2040 and the 2017 years. And again, that's a result of the new counts that we obtained in the city being lower as a result of the pandemic, generally speaking. Now, of course, I mentioned residential projections were down, commercial was up, so that also contributes to the change in traffic patterns in the 2050 forecasts.
Quick question about the graphic. So the 2030 and 2040 numbers, are those from previous updates? And so
Yes.
these are not all kind of forward-looking based on today's data. That's why we see the drop-off?
Yes. So the 2040 bar was from the last update done in 2017.
Got it.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then again, just to point out, the blue represents that's what we call city traffic. The orange bars is what we call regional traffic. The regional traffic is defined as any trip that has either one trip end outside the city. So either they live outside the city and then used, let's say, a grocery store or an office space within Issaquah. So one trip was outside the city, the other end of the trip was inside the city. That's considered a regional trip. And then, of course, any trip that transverses the city. So someone that, let's say, originated in Bellevue and ended up in Sammamish, that's also in that orange bar. So roughly, and that has been pretty consistent over the years, that's roughly about 30% of the total trips in Issaquah are considered regional. Any questions?
No, that's great. I'm just, another comment is I'm kind of shocked. I would have expected the regional trips to be actually higher. But
Yeah.
I'm not questioning the data. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I told you I would define level of service because I'm about to tell you the results, the levels of service within the city. Again, it's sort of like a report card. It's measured A through F, A being a good level of service, basically free flow, and you're experiencing very little delay as you approach and travel through an intersection. And then, basically B, C, and D are all considered acceptable levels of service. In fact, the city's level of service standard is D. The hope is to maintain the majority of the city's intersections at a level of service D or better. And then you'll see how I had mentioned before, the difference between signalized and unsignalized intersections. It is measured differently. Again, signalized is the average of all the movements at the intersection, whereas unsignalized is the worst movement. And you'll see the thresholds are also different between the two intersection of the two control types. Level service E is where you start to see failures, meaning you might approach an intersection and maybe you don't get through on the first green cycle and you end up waiting through a second cycle before you can get through the intersection. That's typically what would happen when you start to experience level service E. And then F is you're going to see that happening a lot more frequently at maybe more than one or two movements at the intersection. You'll also see very long queues, long rows of cars waiting at intersections. And so that's a level service F condition. Just to review, the city's levels of service standards, as I mentioned, is level service D, but there are 6 intersections that the city has previously by code allowed to operate at level service E or F. Those were generally selected in the 2010 update based on the fact that those were intersections that were considered to be primarily regional intersections, meaning they carry the most regional trips. and the city's, responsibility for maintaining levels of service for other agencies was viewed as, not a necessity. That rather the city would prefer investing its money at intersections that serve the city's residents mostly. So that's how those 6 intersections were determined way back when. And so what we do is we measure, when we do these updates, we basically measure against that standard. There's one other standard, and that is, although we allow 6 intersections to operate at level service E or F, overall, when we average all, 80 some intersections within the city, we need to still maintain a level service D overall. So we can't allow those 6 intersections to be so bad that they would result in the overall system operating below level service D. Any questions before I move on?
Nope.
Okay, great. I went the wrong way again. All right, so these are the results of the ta-da of the update. So the map that's shown on the left side of the graphic, those green and orange and red dots are all the intersections that were analyzed and assessed within the city. Those are mostly signalized intersections. Some are roundabouts, and there are some that are today stop controlled intersections, but probably by 2050 would become signalized intersections. That's generally the what determines whether the intersection is considered a concurrency intersection and whether it gets measured for the analysis. So you'll see there are orange and red dots. Those are the ones that are operating at level service E or F. All the green intersections are operating at level service A through D. So there are 4 level service E intersections. Those are at East Lake, Sammamish Parkway and 56th, and Front Street and Gilman. I'm going to point out that those 2 are brand new to the list of intersections this year. They've never been on the list of failing intersections before, and so we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then Front Street and Sunset Way, Issaquah Falls City Road and Black Nugget Road, both operating at level service E. Those were operating at level service E in the previous update as well. And then 2 level service F intersections. Those are probably not surprisingly at the SR 900 12th Northwest Sammamish Road intersection. And I know there's an improvement going on there, so I'm sure there's a question as to why that one is failing. Although there is an improvement there, it is still over capacity even with the improvement by 2050. And then finally, Issaquah Falls City Road and Issaquah Pine Lake Road up on the plateau is another one that's operating at level service F. And then I had mentioned how we make sure that even though we allow those 6 to allow, they can operate at level service E or F, we want to make sure they don't bring the system-wide level of service down below D. And so the calculation that we did for that shows that we're still well within level service D standards. In fact, the overall weighted delay within the city is level service C.
Another question for you. Having just driven over here today from Tallis and looking at the backup at State Route 900 and Tallis Way, way over 80 seconds. Just kind of surprised not to see it here because it's always like that.
Yeah, so Tallis has historically been on the list in the past. It did, I think in the 2017 update, it did fall off the list. It was no longer there. And we saw it again this year fall off the list. I'm with you. I'm surprised as well, but again, it's that average of all the movements at the intersection, and it's just the PM peak hour. So although there might be other times of the day that it operates poorly, that's what this system is based on, the PM peak hour.
So is all the movements, is that weighted in any way, or is it?
It is.
Oh, it is weighted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting intersection, but I'm not going to dispute the model. I'm flabbergasted with the results.
All right, I think, okay, so I think this is my last slide, and then John will come back and talk to you. But, as we had mentioned, we do allow 6 intersections to operate at level service, E or F. But by code, those 6 intersections were defined previously. And I had mentioned to you, we had just talked about the SR 900 Talus intersection was one of the 6 originally, but that one has fallen off the list now, and now we've got 2 new ones. And then the SR 900 I-90 eastbound ramp intersection was the other one that fell off the list. But we have those 2 new ones that got added, and so in order to move forward with the update, there are options as to what we do, since those 6 are by code the 6 that are allowed to operate at level service E or F. And so with that, I'm going to let John talk to you about those options.
Thank you, Torsten.
Yep.
So for the 2 intersections that the model are showing will operate at level service E in the year 2050, there are 3 options that the committee can consider. And the first one is wait. And the reason why the administration is recommending to wait is we have another project that we're just getting started, which is going to evaluate that multimodal component. And so when the city adopted the mobility master plan, one of the actions within the mobility master plan was to evaluate the concurrency system and adopted level of service for alignment with the guiding principles in the mobility master plan. And then the state legislator added a requirement to incorporate multimodal into concurrency. So with this wait option, it allows the city to look at the concurrency policy and the level of service prior to looking at what to do with these 2 intersections. That way, any changes in policy could be used to guide the decision at those intersections. Another option would be to amend Issaquah Municipal Code 18.212.050 level of service and allow the 2 intersections, or I guess I should say one or both of the intersections, to operate at level of service E or F. Or the third option would be to add transportation projects to increase the capacity at those intersections. And we did do a little bit of modeling to see what it would take, but basically, if we were to add east-west, well, at 56th, the model already has additional westbound lanes on the west leg and eastbound legs, or on the eastbound lanes on the west leg. But then we did look at, okay, if we added additional through lanes on the east side of the intersection, that it could reach an overall level of service D. And likewise at Front and Gilman, if we added through lanes on both the east and west legs, then it could achieve level of service D. Next slide.
Hey, John, just,
Oh, yes.
I find that fascinating, because I was expecting that we wouldn't really have any really viable options for improving the level of service. Did you guys do any kind of estimating of what the cost of said improvements would be, or was it just mostly this is what it would take to kind of get us in the model?
Yeah, we did not look at the cost,
Okay.
although I will say widening projects are expensive.
Okay, good. But it's good to know that. I mean, I'm glad you guys ran the, here's what it would take to get us to D.
Yeah. And so the recommendation from the administration is waiting to decide what to do with the intersections of East Lake Sammamish Parkway and Southeast 56th, and the intersection of Front Street North and Gilman Boulevard, until after the city has reviewed the concurrency system and level of service for alignment with the guiding principles in the mobility master plan.
Deputy Council President G. Michelle, that is a mouthful.
So I I lean certainly towards the recommendation from the administration, but to follow up on Councilmember Ray's question, if we wait until we get all this additional information, would we also have a better idea of the financial implications, or are those just, are you really looking to us for policy direction and then the financials will follow that? Or are we going to do the policy first and then look at financial implications? Basically the question.
Yes, and, yeah.
What else you got?
Okay, next slide. All right, so timing and next steps, and I guess this is contingent upon the committee going with the administration's recommendation, is as we look at the schedule for the concurrency policy and level of service, we anticipate having a couple touch points, first with the Transportation Advisory Board in July and October, followed by touch points with the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee in September and November of this year, and the item going to the full council in January. In addition, the Community Planning and Development Department is planning to update the impact fees citywide, including traffic impact fees and pedestrian and bicycle mitigation fees in late 2025. And so that's part of the reason for the recommendation to wait, because any information on adding potential projects wouldn't get put into the new traffic impact fee until that point.
Deputy Council President.
So I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I just think it's probably a question that the public might be interested in. Are there any other adverse impacts if we wait? Are we going to miss deadlines, or, you know, I think there's a deadline for the plan to be submitted. And so any other adverse impacts from waiting that you could tell us about?
None, there are none.
That's kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to check. Thank you.
Right. John, I think you're done, huh? Are you done?
I am.
Okay. Questions? Any other questions from you?
No, I
President?
think we've had some really good
Yeah.
answers to questions. I don't have any other questions.
Yeah, I don't either. I think I appreciate doing that as we went, but we
Yeah.
are in another public comment opportunity, so I'm going to turn to the city clerk and see if there was anybody online. And if you are and you'd like to make public comment, this would be another opportunity to do that.
No virtual attendees, Chair Ray.
Okay. Anybody in the audience want to? No one wants to make public comment. Okay, so we're going to move on, and let's provide some direction. Deputy Council President, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, first of all, as always, John, this is a really thorough and very complete presentation. And again, thank you for answering all my questions prior and here in the meeting. And our consultant also, thank you so much. I think that you've made a really good case for our waiting until we have the additional information that we're looking for. And if there's no adverse impacts to anything in our, if we're meeting all of our deadlines and all of that, I think that I certainly concur that we should wait, and we'll make that decision when we've got more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, if there's nothing pressing us, let's take the time to do it right so we can push this off until we have complete information. I am very interested in not changing the 2 new intersections from to an E or F level of service. So I'm very interested in how we can model that and what impact that would have on transportation impact fees. But I also want to factor into all of that the other modes of transportation and see what effect that might have. So, you know, I think it's one of those actually fairly easy questions. If there's nothing really pushing us and there's more information to be gathered that can make us do a more informed decision. Let's gather that information and deal with it. And it also seems like the next big thing that's going to happen is with changing transportation impact fees, and that's not until next year sometime. So we definitely got a window here. I just want to echo what the Deputy Council President said, which is that was a great presentation, Torsten. I really, really appreciated it because concurrency is really tough. And you covered a lot of great stuff about the model and how we did that. And it was maybe, this is my 6th year here on the council, maybe the first time I really have understood the modeling. So I really appreciate that. And John, of course, always well done. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right. John, you have what you need from us? I think we were
Yes, I do.
in pretty raging alignment on direction. So, all right. That was our one agenda item. We have next agenda item is announcements. Deputy Council President DiMichele, anything from you?
You know, the only thing I'm going to, I would like to report on, and I'll do it again at the full council, is the in-person meeting we had with the Eastside Transportation Partnership was a great success. And we held a hybrid meeting in Redmond. First chance for the Eastside Transportation Partnership to get together since the pandemic. So it was really great, and I think everybody really enjoyed the opportunity to spend that time sharing what was going on in our local community. So yeah, slowly but surely we're recovering from the pandemic. It's going to take a while.
All right. I think then that we are done. So we'll adjourn at 7:42. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone.